Welcome to the Matt McKeever Show. This is a brand new concept, a brand new thing I'm testing out, so I'd love to get your feedback. But the idea is I want to talk to you guys about finances, real estate, politics, and just kind of any other cool shit that I stumble upon during the week. Let's create a discussion, let's create a community, let's share our perspectives and our thoughts on these different subject matters. I'd love to get your feedback. Let me know in the comment section. Smash the like button if you like this idea, but otherwise, let's just get into it. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan podcast, the financial independent retired early community's blind spots, what areas are we not paying attention to when we're thinking about retiring at such a young age. We'll also be talking about the Canada's job report that just came out. It didn't look pretty, but there's actually two sides to every story. We're also going to talk about should public education be free or should education in general be free, as well as talking about rent control and should you buy your son or daughter a rental property when they move away to attend university or college. All that and more in today's episode. Let's get into it. So the first story I wanted to talk to you guys about was Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan podcast. Have you seen it yet? Did you check it out? It's fantastic. I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't given it a chance. It was unfortunate the coverage though it got to the mainstream media. They were focusing on Tesla's stock price drop, which honestly probably had more to do with the executives that were leaving Tesla than it did with Elon Musk being on Joe Rogan and maybe inhaling one puff of marijuana. It's just really unfortunate that even the mainstream media is going after such clickbait at this point, because it was a fantastic discussion that covered a wide range of subject matter. I haven't even had a chance to watch all of it as of this recording, but I'll probably be binging it right after, so I'm really excited. I watched the first hour and a half, had tons of takeaway from it. Are you guys scared of AI as I am? Because Elon's definitely, it's high on his list of concerns. It was fascinating just to hear him talk about everything he's up to, as well as just get a little bit more of a peek into the man himself. And it was a bit more of a humanizing experience, or a humanizing interview in my opinion. So I highly recommend you check it out. There'll be a link in the video description down below, so just jump over there and watch the Joe Rogan experience. The second thing I want to share with you guys today was a Choose FI post in their Facebook community. And so if you're not familiar with Choose FI, it's a fantastic podcast on financial independence. And this post in particular was asking, what are the blind spots that we have in the financial independence community? I thought that was a great question, and just want to share with you some of the amazing responses that were in there, because it's great for any of us that are chasing financial independence, trying to retire early, or those of us that have already done so, because it's a good reminder that, well, let's check it out. What are the FI community's biggest blind spots? So the first one I want to talk about was the recency bias on market returns. And I 100% agree with this. The last 10 years, the last decade essentially, has been a fantastic time to be an investor, whether in real estate or whether investing in the stock or equity markets. It's really easy to develop a significant bias because of that. And that bias results in us maybe being too optimistic when projecting the sort of returns we expect to get into the future, or the sort of returns that we'll get on our financial nest egg when we retire. However, there is a way to avoid the recency bias. All we need to do is look at the Trinity study. If you're not familiar, I've done YouTube videos on the Trinity study in the past, so I'm not going to get too in-depth into it. The Trinity study gave us the 4% safe withdrawal rate. And it's a rule of thumb that a lot of us in the financial independence retired early community rely upon in order to determine what we can withdraw from our financial nest egg. So for example, if you have $1 million in savings, the 4% safe withdrawal rate shows that if you withdrew 4% or $40,000 a year, with relative certainty, you could essentially never have to worry about going bankrupt. However, you may end up touching the principal. You need to learn more about the Trinity study as well. You should probably check out FireCalc if you're interested in doing a more in-depth analysis on how long your financial nest egg could last. Another person pointed out on this post that healthcare, and so healthcare is a major concern for a lot of Americans. It's less of a concern for us Canadians. However, you do have to pay for your prescriptions. Now, you can apply in Canada and get the cost of your prescriptions reduced depending on your financial needs. So again, it's less of an issue for us Canadians, but it's definitely a concern for our American brethren. So 100%, a lot of people when they first start focusing on financial independence, retire early, they may get a little bit too optimistic and assume that they'll never have any health issues, they'll never have any critical illnesses. That is a concern, so things like health insurance or figuring out other ways to mitigate that is extremely important if you're going to retire at a young age. So 100% agree. Another person pointed out empathy towards those that aren't as financially successful. And that's something I definitely see too. It's important to remember not everyone's read all the books we've read, listened to all the podcasts we've listened to, or binged all the YouTube videos that we've all binged. When dealing with someone that's new to the financial independence community, it's important that we share with them in a helpful manner, that we come from a place of non-judgment, that we're not hitting them over the head and berating them for their past choices. The past is in the past. We can't have really any say over it. So it's important to focus on the now and the future. I see it occasionally in the financial independence community where people are judging others. It doesn't help them learn. And when you judge someone, they end up putting up a wall of defense because they don't like to be personally attacked. Rather than judging people, it's important that we just try and lead by example and share information as openly, honestly, but as helpfully too. Make it a judgment-free zone when you're helping someone with their finances or when you're helping someone discover financial independence. Another great point was diversification outside of the US. So whether you're an American or Canadian, likely a lot of your financial assets are invested in North America. And that's definitely less diversified than a lot of financial planners would like to see. And it's definitely a lot less diversified than a lot of financial bloggers or vloggers would recommend as well. So again, I'm not saying that you need to be diversified, but I'm saying you should at least be aware of the fact and aware of the risks that maybe come along with being only invested in Canadian or American equities. Great points in this Choose FI post. I'll link to it in the video description down below so you can check out the community. I highly recommend you check out the podcast as well as the Facebook group. Tons of great people and tons of great content. And another discussion from Facebook I wanted to present to you guys was from REAL. And so REAL is the Real Estate Association of London. It's a group that myself, Dylan, and Kellen all manage and founded. Essentially, it's just another real estate investor meetup group here in London, Ontario. And one of our members asked a question about a kitchen renovation she's considering undertaking. She was just quoted $17,000. Thought it was a little high and wanted to get some feedback from the community. I think this is a great way of showing you guys the importance of networking, whether online or in person, because she got tons of amazing feedback. I just wanted to highlight some of the best discussions for you. So as we can see here, Anne was just asking this question that she was quoted $17,000 and her selection was on the lower end of the price scale. This is a photo of her existing kitchen. This is kind of the design they've done now for that $17,000 renovation. We got a couple 3D renderings here, which just kind of help paint a picture. And yeah, there's tons of great help. So a lot of people recommending IKEA kitchens. My buddy Cloud was discussing that he thought it was way too much. He thought there was great ways to potentially reduce the cost by salvaging the existing kitchen. You guys know I love salvaging kitchens. It's one of my strategic renovations that I'm always talking about on my YouTube channel. However, Anne did mention that the wood seems to be really soft and it appears that it's just not holding up well to the wear and tear of everyday life. So she does definitely want to replace it. Adam Kitchener shared a link to a wholesaler of kitchen stuff. Michael Rosehart jumped in the comment section, shared the fact that Rona currently has a sale on kitchen cabinets, and he expected this renovation could be done for $2,000 to $3,000. Now, I think that's probably a little bit on the low end. However, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 seems pretty practical without having to really put a ton of effort into this yourself if you need to be hands-off. As well, on the other side of the spectrum, my buddy Dan was explaining that it really does come down to the quality and your exact needs. And I know that Dan's coming from the perspective that he does a lot of high-end kitchens. He's a master at woodworking, and so he just wanted to share the perspective that, hey, always cheaper isn't always better. 100% agree. It really depends on the situation. I think Anne got a ton of great advice. If you're not currently networking, if you're not currently part of different Facebook groups like Real of London, I think you're doing yourself a disservice whether you're a landlord or an aspiring landlord or real estate investor. How would you know what a kitchen costs if you've never done a kitchen renovation or if you haven't done dozens of kitchen renovations and you're not talking to people that are doing it? You might assume that that $17,000 was your only option. So networking, 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 guys. And speaking of networking, it seems unfortunately like a lot more Canadians are going to be networking these days because the Canada Jobs Report just came out and it didn't look pretty. In the month of August, we lost 52,000 jobs. A lot of those came from my home province of Ontario. The first article on the Canada's job reports that I want to share with you came from the Financial Post. And in fact, it was a great article that really gave some perspective to this job loss because at first, the loss of 52,000 jobs sounds extremely dramatic and panic-inducing. And so I want to give a shout out to Kevin Carmichael for such a great article. And the first thing I want to highlight from his story is StatCan's latest batch of numbers suggest job creation has stagnated this year. Net employment was about 14,000 positions lower in August than at the end of 2017. But that stagnation has occurred at a high level. Think of the Canadian economy like a 5-speed car that's been running in fifth for a couple of years now. The unemployment rate was 6% in August, up from 5.8%, which was the lowest on record that date back to mid-1970s. There probably is room for marginal improvement, but in effect, Canada's economy has entered the zone that economists associate with full employment. So that's a good point. If we're at a balanced economy or a full employment perspective, shedding a few jobs isn't necessarily a dramatic sign that the world's crumbling. But if you want to take on the perspective that the world's crumbling, there's always the greaterfool.ca. So recently Garth Turner from the greaterfool.ca did an article on the jobs report as well. And his perspective is that the current increase in minimum wage here in Ontario has dramatically hit the lower income spectrum of the employment field, and that's what's caused Ontario to shed so many jobs. Recently here in Ontario, our minimum wage bumped up to $14. It was a dramatic increase, and it's going to continue to increase. It has concerned a lot of small employers and large employers, and it's concerned a lot of economists as well. My personal perspective is I'm libertarian at heart, so I think increasing the minimum wage, particularly so drastically in a short period of time, isn't a wise financial move. I think that there are risks that it's going to push a lot of businesses towards automation. It's going to create a lot of temporary pain and unemployment. However, long term, it'll force reinvestment, and people, ideally at least, will get retrained and will find new skill sets and hopefully get higher, better employment. If you're not familiar with Garth Turner though, one thing I just want to warn you guys about, he's definitely very bearish on certain subjects and does not hold back. If I was you, I would take his advice with a grain of salt, but it's always great to have a contrarian's perspective. But to provide more perspective on the current job situation, let's jump back to that Financial Post article by Kevin Carmichael, because there's another great point here. And that great point is that the labor force survey is notoriously volatile, so much so that some on Bay Street were advising their clients to stop reading it. Our economics colleagues may have a slightly different perspective, but when it comes to the monthly throw of the dice that is the Canadian Jobs Report, we continually ask, why does anyone bother looking at or reporting on monthly changes in employment? Sid Warren Lovely, who heads research on government debt for the National Bank Financial in Toronto. So that's another good perspective. If a lot of the major economists aren't relying on this report, what sort of reports or what sort of metrics are they relying on? And one of the gauges that they do rely on is the duration of unemployment, which has shrunk to an average of 17.5 weeks in October. As we can see, clearly this jobs report isn't black and white. There's a lot of nuances to it. Is it the end of the world, or is it sunshine and rainbows forever? I don't think it's either. But if I had to choose one, I think Garth Turner's version of event is a little bit too extreme for me. I don't think it's the end of the world. I don't think that our economy is crumbling. However, we should be paying attention, because whether you're investing in real estate, stocks, or any other type of investment that's impacted by the macroeconomics here in Canada, you want to know what's going on with jobs, what's going on with employment, because it's going to have a big impact on our overall economy. Talking about the Financial Post, there was another great article this week discussing rent control. I have maybe a bit of a bias as a landlord, but I don't believe rent control is good for the tenant or the landlord. But it's really interesting to see, and they actually share the stats showing the increases in rents going on in Toronto, and that our current rent control is not impacting it. At the end of the day, my personal opinion is rent control results in reduced inventory. So what ends up happening is a lot of landlords will take properties off the market and repurpose them for personal consumption or sell or try and flip, versus having a rental property if they're forced to rent at a certain price simply because their margins or returns dissipate. So often government intervention ends up having unintended consequences, and it's something we should be really aware of, because it's really easy to empathize with someone and just want to jump to conclusions and force a solution down someone's throat. But those unintended consequences often end up making housing even more expensive. And so the current housing crisis they're having in Toronto is clearly shown by the increase in rents here on this graph from the Financial Post. We can see that a 3-bedroom now is renting out for $3,500 on average in condominium apartments in the GTA. A 2-bedroom's getting up to over $2,500 a month. A 1-bedroom is over $2,000 a month. And even a bachelor now, it looks like, is coming in close to $1,750 a month. in the GTA. That's really great to know if you're a real estate investor. The rents are definitely dramatically increasing, and maybe that's going to help your returns, and maybe it's something that once you get turnover you need to be aware of, because don't be renting it out at yesterday's prices because the market's dramatically changing. What do you guys think about public education? Do you think that public education's doing us a great service or disservice? There's a really interesting article I'd like to share with you guys from Mises.org that I think you should check out. This website is obviously related to Ludwig von Mises, the famous Austrian economist, and I'm a big fan of his writings. I'm a big fan of his teachings. I'm a bit of a fanboy on this, but I thought there was a great article. It's listed in the video description down below, but one thing I wanted to highlight from it without getting too deep into it was talking about positive rights versus negative rights. So negative rights essentially are rights where someone or something or the government doesn't have the right to interfere. That's the idea of like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whereas positive rights are where someone's compelled to provide you a good or service. So a positive right would be free education. A negative right would be freedom of thought, the freedom of press, the freedom of association. I think it's really important that people understand that there's nuances to rights. There's a lot of people that want to jump to conclusions immediately, but when we do things like have free education, there's a ton of unintended consequences that arise from that. For one, you're granting essentially a monopoly of education to the government in this case. It has a lot of impact. Think about it. Growing up, you were probably taught the food pyramid. How much do you trust in the food pyramid now? We're constantly seeing it dramatically change, and yet once we give a monopoly or grant access to a government agency to be the sole provider of something, what ends up happening with a government that gets involved in, say, public education is a lot of other infrastructure and organizations get mapped onto that, and it ends up becoming the opposite of nimble, and so it's very slow to change, and that ends up resulting in poorer education in my opinion. Yeah, I just kind of want to break down for you guys the difference between positive rights and negative rights. I'd love to hear your perspective both on that as well as public education in the comment section down below, so jump into it. Finally, I want to talk to you guys about a post that happened in the Canadian Money Forum. And side tangent, if you're not familiar with the Canadian Money Forum, it's one of the best resources for Canadian investors. I'd highly recommend you check it out. One note I would make though is there's a slight bias against real estate in that community, so just take some of their real estate advice with a grain of salt, at least in my opinion. However, a question that I get all the time is, my son or daughter is going off to university. Should we buy a rental property and make a student rental property and have them manage it for us rather than spend money on their rent? And I completely understand the perspective the parents are taking here. Rather than have your son or daughter spend tens of thousands of dollars over the period of 4 to 5 years on rent, why not buy an investment property and make money rather than spend it? There's a lot of things people don't take into consideration when considering this train of thought. The first thing is transaction costs and holding time. If you're only going to be holding the property for a couple years or even 4 or 5 years, transaction costs will dramatically eat into your profit margin. So for example, in Ontario, Canada, where I'm from, we have to pay land transfer tax. So that's a cost whenever you buy a property. You have to pay a certain percentage just for buying the property. You also have to pay for lawyers and title insurance and all sorts of other closing costs. In addition, when you go to sell your home, assuming that you use a realtor, you're gonna have to pay a realtor's commission. And that could be, again, anywhere from like 2.5 up to 5%. Even if you saw some decent appreciation over 2 to 3, 4, or 5 years of owning that property, it could get eaten or dramatically reduced by the fact that there was costs associated with acquiring it. Secondly, are you a real estate investor? Do you want to become a real estate investor? Do you want to manage a property, or does your son or daughter want to manage a property while going to school full time? It's another big thing that needs to be taken into consideration. Because honestly, when I used to buy student rentals, some of the best opportunities that we would get would be from parents who thought they wanted to be landlords, bought a property for their son or daughter, and then it ended up not working out. Or it worked out, but the moment their child left the school, it then fell apart because they no longer had hands-on management, and they had not networked, they had not learned much. They literally bought it on a whim or bought it off of one realtor's recommendation. So if you're gonna buy a student rental property for your son or daughter, you need to do the exact same research that any other real estate investor or any other investment would require. Do your homework, do your due diligence, and don't just jump into it blindly thinking you're gonna save money on rent. Well, that's it for this episode, the very first episode of the Matt McKeever Show. I'd love to get your feedback. Jump in the comment section down below. Did you enjoy this video? Do you like the idea of it? Smash the like button if you got value from it, but this is really new to me, so I'm open to getting your feedback. Do you want this to be longer, shorter, more stories, less stories, more in depth on the stories, less in depth on the stories? I'm open to your perspective. I'm open to your opinion. I really want to foster and create a community here. What should I talk about next week? Jump in the comment section down below and share links to your favorite articles or podcasts that you think I should check out and discuss. And finally, who in my audience knows Reddit well? I'd kind of like to create my own little subreddit for this show where you guys can then vote up the stories you want me to talk about or share with me the stories you want me to talk about, and we can all share our perspective and dive deeper into them as well. There'll be certain stories I probably won't have time to cover, and yet I want to bring to your attention. I think that would be a great opportunity. I know that already my attention's far too fractured and I don't want to take on another community or another project at this point, so I'm looking for a volunteer or two. Hit me up on Instagram or message me on or leave a comment on this YouTube video or message me on Reddit. You can find me, my handles in the video description down below, or it's at Mathematics. That's MATTATICS. At Mathematics. Let me know if you'd be willing to help moderate or help set up the subreddit for me. I'd greatly appreciate it. Anyways, hope you guys got value from this video. Hope you're enjoying the concept of this new video. I'm really excited by the idea, so smash the like button if you got value. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to my channel. And until next time, remember, making money is a team sport. There's more than enough money in this world for us to all make it, but if you're not saving it, I mean, like, what's the point, guys? Thanks.